Welcome back to your continuing education in divine anger management, where grief transforms into wrath with the efficiency of a Bronze Age weapons factory. From brilliant dress-up schemes to posthumous drag racing, this is the story of how the death of one good man turned the greatest warrior in history into something that made the gods themselves nervous. The morning that changes everything begins like any other day in your ongoing experiment with principled sulking. You wake in your tent to the familiar sounds of an army, pretending that losing its best warrior is merely a minor tactical adjustment. Outside, men sharpen weapons they hope they won't need to use, discuss strategies they hope will work, and maintain the kind of forced optimism that armies develop when facing impossible odds. You've been holding your strike for weeks now, and the results have been exactly what you predicted they would be. Greek casualties are mounting, Trojan confidence is growing, and Agamemnon's leadership is revealing its limitations with the clarity that only sustained failure can provide. It should feel like vindication, but instead it feels like watching a slow disaster that you have the power to prevent but choose not to. Patroclus finds you in this mood of grim satisfaction mixed with growing unease, carrying breakfast and the expression of someone who's made a decision he's not entirely sure you'll approve of. The army is planning another assault today, he reports as he settles beside you, his voice carrying the kind of careful neutrality that suggests he's leading up to something significant. You reply with the polite interest you've developed for military operations you're no longer participating in. How optimistic of them. Hector led a sortie yesterday that pushed our lines back almost to the ships, Patroclus continues, and something in his tone makes you look at him more carefully. The men are concerned. Concerned is a diplomatic way of describing what you've been observing from your tent. The Greek army that landed on this beach with such confidence has spent weeks discovering what warfare looks like when they're not guaranteed to win. Morale isn't just low, it's approaching the kind of crisis that makes armies disintegrate rather than fight. I should be concerned, you observe with the detached objectivity of someone watching other people's problems unfold. They're fighting the greatest war in history without their greatest warrior. Yes, Patroclus agrees, but his tone suggests that stating obvious facts isn't why he's here. That's actually what I wanted to discuss with you. There's something in his voice that makes you set down your breakfast and give him your full attention. Patroclus has many qualities, but dramatic flair isn't one of them. When he sounds serious, it's because something serious is happening. What exactly did you want to discuss, you ask, though you're beginning to suspect you won't like the answer. Your armour, he says simply, and the words hit you like a physical blow. Your armour. The divine bronze that your mother commissioned from Hephaestus himself, crafted to enhance your already supernatural abilities and mark you as something beyond mortal warriors, the visible symbol of your status, your power, your right to stand apart from ordinary heroes. What about my armour, you ask carefully, though you're beginning to understand what he's suggesting, and you don't like it at all. The men need hope, Patroclus explains with the patient tone of someone who's thought this through carefully. They need to believe that victory is possible, that they're not abandoned, that someone is willing to fight for them. Then they should convince Agamemnon to apologize properly, you reply, because the solution to their morale problems seems obvious and doesn't require your participation. Agamemnon's pride won't allow a proper apology, Patroclus observes with the kind of practical wisdom that cuts through political complexities, and your pride won't allow you to accept anything less. It's an uncomfortable assessment, because it's accurate. You've painted yourself into a corner where backing down means admitting you were wrong, but continuing means watching your allies suffer for the sake of your principles. So what are you suggesting, you ask, though you're afraid you already know. Let me wear your armour, Patroclus says with the straightforward directness that makes impossible suggestions sound reasonable. Let me lead the Myrmidons into battle. The men will see the armour, assume you've returned, and fight with renewed confidence. The suggestion is so audacious that for a moment you can't quite process it. Patroclus wants to impersonate you. To put on your divine armour, carry your reputation into battle, and pretend to be the legendary Achilles while you continue your strike in comfortable anonymity. That's, you start, then stop, because there are so many things wrong with this idea that you're not sure where to begin. Dangerous, Patroclus suggests with a slight smile. Deceptive, completely insane. All of those, you agree, though part of you is already considering the logistics. Plus, suicidal, dishonest, and likely to end with you being killed by heroes who think they're fighting me. Possibly, he admits with the kind of casual acceptance that suggests he's already made peace with the risks. But also possibly effective. The sight of your armour on the battlefield might be enough to break the Trojan momentum, give our lines time to regroup, prevent a complete collapse. There's logic to it, you have to admit. Your reputation has become so intimidating that even the illusion of your presence might provide strategic advantages. Trojan heroes who've been pressing their attacks might hesitate if they think you've returned. Greek soldiers who've been retreating might rally if they believe their champion is back. But the risks are enormous. Patroclus is skilled, very skilled, but he's not you. He doesn't have your supernatural abilities, your divine protection, your years of specialized training under Chiron. Putting him in your armor and sending him against Troy's finest warriors is like sending a competent actor to perform surgery because he's played a doctor on stage. The armor won't make you invulnerable, you point out, because this seems like a crucial detail that needs to be explicitly stated. It's just bronze and leather, however well crafted. I know, Patroclus replies, with the calm acceptance of someone who's considered all the implications. But I don't need to be invulnerable. I just need to be visible. Visible to enemies who'll be trying very hard to kill you, you clarify, because the romantic notion of battlefield theatre tends to overlook the practical reality of people attempting murder. Visible to allies who need to believe that someone still cares about their survival, he corrects gently, and the words hit you harder than you'd expected. Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? Not military strategy or tactical deception, but the simple fact that good people are dying while you maintain your principled position. Patroclus isn't volunteering for a suicide mission, he's volunteering to be the person you're refusing to be. You could die, you say, because the possibility needs to be acknowledged, even if it can't be prevented. People are dying already, Patroclus replies with the kind of matter-of-fact acceptance that makes moral complexity feel like a luxury. At least this way their deaths might serve a purpose. You stare at him across the small space of your tent, this man who's become the closest thing to family you have outside of divine relatives and abandoned lovers. Patroclus, who speaks to you as a person rather than a legend, who challenges your decisions without questioning your worth, who somehow managed to remain human despite spending months in close proximity to your growing god complex. If I let you do this, you say carefully, you have to promise me something. What? Don't try to be me, you explain with the kind of urgency that comes from understanding exactly how dangerous heroic enthusiasm can be. Don't attempt the impossible, don't challenge champions, don't do anything that requires supernatural abilities you don't possess. Just be visible, inspire the troops, then come back. Patroclus nods with the solemn attention of someone receiving crucial instructions. Just visibility, no heroics. No heroics, you confirm, though even as you say it you're aware that battlefield situations have a way of making such distinctions academic. The armour fits him surprisingly well, considering it was crafted specifically for your proportions by divine smiths who don't typically accommodate size variations. The bronze gleams like captured sunlight, the leather is supple as silk, and the overall effect is magnificent enough to make observers forget that the person wearing it isn't actually Achilles. How do I look? Patroclus asks as he adjusts the helmet that bears your distinctive crest. Like someone who's about to give the Trojans the worst day they've had in weeks, you reply, which is both true and terrifying. Good, he says with the kind of satisfied confidence that suggests he's looking forward to this performance. That's exactly the impression I was hoping for. The Myrmidons receive news of their commander's return with enthusiasm that borders on religious fervour. These men have been watching their army struggle without their champion, forced to sit idle while their friends and allies suffer defeats that their presence might have prevented. The sight of your armour, your weapons, your familiar silhouette preparing for battle, transforms them from frustrated observers into eager participants. Achilles leads us back to glory, someone shouts, and the cry is taken up by dozens of voices until it becomes a chant that carries across the entire Greek camp. You watch this transformation from the entrance to your tent, hidden in shadow while your identity marches toward battle wearing your face. It's a strange experience, like watching your own funeral procession, except everyone is celebrating instead of mourning. Strange feeling? Briseis asks as she joins you, her own expression unreadable as she observes the spectacle of Patroclus leading your men toward combat. Very, you admit, because there's something profoundly unsettling about seeing your reputation walking away from you. Like being haunted by my own ghost. Or like discovering what you look like from the outside, she suggests, with the kind of insight that makes uncomfortable observations feel like philosophical education. The battle that follows unfolds exactly as Patroclus predicted it would. The sight of your armour on the battlefield electrifies the Greek forces, who fight with renewed vigour now that they believe their champion has returned. The Trojan advance falters as commanders try to adjust their tactics to account for your supposed presence. What had been a rout becomes a stalemate, then slowly begins to shift in favour of the Greeks. From your position overlooking the plain, you can track Patroclus's progress by following the reactions of the soldiers around him. Greek morale surges wherever he appears. Trojan resistance stiffens whenever he approaches their lines. He's not fighting with your supernatural abilities, but he's fighting with your reputation, and that proves almost as effective. He's doing well, Briseis observes as we watch a particularly effective charge that breaks through Trojan defences and sends them retreating toward their walls. Too well, you reply, because success in battle has a way of becoming addictive, and addiction leads to overconfidence, and overconfidence leads to the kind of mistakes that get heroes killed. But your concerns seem unfounded as the day progresses. Patroclus fights with skill and courage, but not with recklessness. He inspires the troops without attempting impossible feats. He pushes the Trojans back without pursuing them into obviously dangerous positions. Everything proceeds exactly according to the careful plan you discussed, until it doesn't. The moment when everything changes comes when Patroclus finds himself face to face with Sarpedon, son of Zeus and one of Troy's most formidable allies. It's the kind of encounter that should trigger immediate withdrawal. Sarpedon is divine nobility, a warrior whose abilities rival your own, exactly the sort of opponent you'd warned Patroclus to avoid. Instead, Patroclus engages him. You watch from your distant vantage point as your dearest friend fights a battle he can't win while wearing armour that makes him look like someone who should be able to win any battle. The combat is brief but decisive. Sarpedon falls to Patroclus's spear, and suddenly the man who is supposed to provide mere inspiration has achieved something genuinely heroic. He killed Sarpedon, Briseis says, with the kind of quiet amazement that extraordinary events deserve. Healed Zeus' son, you correct, because the political implications of this victory are considerably more complex than simple military success. But Patroclus doesn't stop to consider political implications. Success has given him confidence. Confidence has given him momentum, and momentum is carrying him forward into increasingly dangerous territory. Instead of consolidating his victory and withdrawing as planned, he presses his advantage. Instead of maintaining the illusion of being you while acting with appropriate caution, he begins actually trying to be you. The charge that follows is magnificent, and doomed in equal measure. Patroclus leads your Myrmidons in an assault on Troy's walls themselves, the kind of impossible attack that only someone with your abilities should attempt. For a moment, it almost succeeds. Surprise and momentum carry him closer to the city than anyone has managed in months of siege warfare. Then Apollo intervenes. The god appears on Troy's walls like divine retribution given physical form, his presence immediately recognizable to anyone who's seen immortals manifest in mortal conflicts. His involvement should come as no surprise. You killed his grandson Tenes months ago, and divine grudges tend to be both comprehensive and patient. The blow that Apollo delivers to Patroclus isn't visible from your distance, but its effects are immediately apparent. Your friend staggers, the divine armour suddenly seeming too heavy for his frame, and the momentum of his impossible assault transforms into confused retreat. That's when Hector appears. Prince Hector of Troy, noble son of Priam, defender of his city and protector of his people, the man you should be fighting but have been too proud to face. He sees a wounded enemy wearing familiar armour and draws the obvious conclusion about both identity and opportunity. The spear thrust that ends Patroclus's life is precise and merciful. A clean death for a brave warrior who died attempting something beyond his abilities. But mercy doesn't change the fundamental fact that your dearest friend has just been killed while wearing your armour, fighting your battles, and bearing your reputation. Hector strips the divine armour from Patroclus's corpse with the practiced efficiency of someone who understands the value of legendary equipment. Your armour, crafted by gods and worn by heroes, now belongs to the enemy, who killed the man you loved most in the world. The silence that follows this realization is profound and terrible. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of something fundamental breaking, like the moment between lightning and thunder, when the world holds its breath before the storm. You stand at the entrance to your tent, watching Troy's walls where your armour gleams on shoulders that don't belong to you, and feel something inside your chest transform from wounded pride into molten rage. Patroclus is dead. Your friend, your anchor to humanity, your connection to everything good about yourself, has been killed by an enemy prince who had every right to defend his city against invaders. The logic is perfect, the justice is unassailable, and none of that matters compared to the simple fact that the most important person in your world is gone. Resaces stands beside you in the growing twilight, her presence the only thing preventing you from screaming loud enough to crack the foundations of Troy. When she speaks, her voice carries the careful neutrality of someone delivering news that will change everything. "I'm sorry," she says simply, and the words hit you like physical blows. Because sorry doesn't bring back the dead, sorry doesn't undo mistakes, sorry doesn't fill the hole that Patroclus's absence has torn in the centre of your existence. Sorry is just a word people use when there's nothing else to say and nothing else to do. You don't reply, because words feel inadequate for what you're experiencing. Instead, you stand in silence and watch the sun set behind Troy's walls, painting the ancient stones in shades of gold and crimson that look remarkably like blood. Tomorrow, you'll return to the war, not for Agamemnon, not for Greece, not for glory or honour or any of the noble reasons that bring heroes to battle. You'll return for Patroclus, and you'll make sure that everyone involved understands exactly what it costs to kill the people you love. Tonight, though, you mourn, and the sound of your grief carries across the plain like a promise of retribution that makes even the gods uneasy. Because nothing says successful military deception like getting your best friend killed while he's wearing your clothes. The news of Patroclus's death reaches you through the complex network of messengers, scouts, and professional bearers of terrible tidings that keep armies informed about their own disasters. But you already know, have known since the moment you saw your armour gleaming on Hector's shoulders, since the silence that followed the end of an impossible assault told you everything you needed to know about its cost. What you don't know is the details, and details have a way of transforming grief into something more dangerous. The messenger who brings you the full account is young, probably no more than 16, with the kind of shattered expression that comes from witnessing events that will feature in his nightmares for the rest of his life. He approaches your tent with the careful reverence of someone delivering news to a person whose reaction might involve considerable violence. Lord Achilles, he begins with the kind of formal courtesy that suggests he's rehearsed this speech. "I bring word from the battlefield." "I know what happened," you reply, because watching a friend die while wearing your armour provides a fairly comprehensive summary of recent events. "Yes, Lord," the messenger agrees, clearly uncertain about how much detail is appropriate when discussing personal tragedies with legendary heroes. "But there are specifics you should know." Specifics, details about how Patroclus died, who killed him, what happened to his body afterward, information that will either help you process your grief or transform it into something that threatens the structural integrity of reality itself. "Tell me," you say, because not knowing feels worse than knowing, even if knowing proves unbearable. The story that follows unfolds with the kind of horrible inevitability that characterizes both great tragedies and military disasters. Patroclus had fought brilliantly, inspiring the troops and driving back Trojan forces with exactly the kind of tactical success you'd hoped for. His victory over Sarpedon had been genuine heroism, the sort of achievement that should have guaranteed his place in the songs that bards sing about legendary battles. But success had bred overconfidence. Overconfidence had led to overreach. And overreach had carried him into a confrontation with forces beyond his ability to handle. Apollo's intervention had been swift and decisive, a divine blow that stripped away Patroclus's strength and left him vulnerable to mortal weapons. Hector's spear took him in the stomach, the messenger reports with the clinical detachment that soldiers develop when describing violence. The wound was mortal, but not immediately so. He lived long enough to speak. What did he say? You ask, though you're not sure you want to know the answer. The messenger hesitates, clearly recognizing that some final words carry more weight than others. He said that Prince Hector should enjoy his victory while he could, because death was already hunting him. He said that you would come for vengeance, and that not even Troy's walls would protect the man who killed Patroclus while he wore Achilles' armour. It's exactly the sort of thing Patroclus would say, practical, prophetic, and delivered with the kind of calm certainty that makes threats sound like simple statements of fact. Even dying, he'd understood the implications of his death better than anyone else involved. And Hector, you ask, because the enemy's reaction to prophetic final words often determines how seriously those prophecies should be taken. Prince Hector stripped the armour from the body, the messenger continues, with obvious reluctance. He said that any man foolish enough to impersonate Achilles deserved whatever fate found him. The words hit you like a series of physical blows, each detail adding another layer of insult to the fundamental injury of loss. Not only had Hector killed your dearest friend, he'd done it while expressing contempt for Patroclus's courage. Not only had he taken your armour as spoils of war, he'd treated Patroclus's death as evidence of foolishness rather than heroism. The rage that follows this realization isn't like normal anger. Normal anger burns hot and brief, flaring up and dying down according to the rhythms of human emotion. This is something else entirely. A cold, patient fury that settles into your bones like a permanent condition and begins planning elaborate revenge schemes with the methodical precision of a master craftsman designing architectural masterpieces. Where is the body, you ask? Because recovery of fallen comrades is one of the few universal constants in warfare. Ajax and Menelaus fought to retrieve it, the messenger explains, and for the first time his voice carries genuine admiration rather than professional reporting. The battle over Lord Patroclus's corpse lasted hours. Ajax held off the entire Trojan army, while Menelaus carried the body to safety. It's a small comfort, knowing that good men risked their lives to ensure that Patroclus receives proper funeral rites. But comfort feels inadequate when measured against the scope of what you've lost. Patroclus isn't just dead. He's been killed by someone who dismissed his courage as stupidity, stripped of armour that should have protected him, treated as a prize rather than a person. The political implications of his death are obvious to anyone who understands how coalition warfare operates. Your strike against Agamemnon has just been rendered irrelevant by circumstances that make personal grievance seem petty compared to personal loss. You can't maintain principled opposition to military leadership when your best friend has died fighting the battles you refuse to fight. But politics feels like a luxury you can't afford when grief is demanding immediate attention. Patroclus is dead because he tried to be you, while you were being too proud to be yourself. The causal chain is clear, the responsibility is obvious, and no amount of blaming Agamemnon's leadership can change the fundamental fact that your friend died wearing your armour because you weren't wearing it yourself. Summon the captains, you tell the messenger, who seems relieved to have a specific task that doesn't involve delivering more terrible news. All of them, and send word to Agamemnon that I want to speak with him. Yes, Lord, the messenger replies, clearly recognizing the significance of your return to active participation. Should I tell him what this concerns? Tell him, you say with the kind of calm that usually precedes catastrophic violence, that Achilles has decided to rejoin the war. The gathering that assembles in your tent over the following hour represents every significant leader in the Greek expeditionary force. Agamemnon arrives with the careful dignity of someone who's not entirely sure whether he's being summoned for reconciliation or execution. Ajax and Odysseus carry themselves with the wariness of people who've learned to be cautious around grief-stricken heroes. A dozen lesser kings and princes fill out the assembly, their expressions ranging from hopeful to terrified. Gentlemen, You begin with the kind of formal courtesy that makes simple statements sound like official pronouncements. I'm returning to active duty. The silence that follows this announcement is profound and complicated. Relief wars with apprehension as everyone processes the implications of having their most effective warrior back in service, while that warrior is clearly operating under the influence of recent trauma. We're grateful for your decision, Agamemnon says carefully, clearly trying to navigate between authority and diplomacy. The army has missed your leadership. The army, you reply, with the kind of precision that makes corrections feel like threats, has missed my ability to kill people efficiently. Which is fortunate, because I'm about to demonstrate exactly how efficient that killing can be. It's not exactly a reassuring statement, and the assembled leaders exchange glances that suggest they're wondering whether your return will solve their problems or create new ones. Our strategic objectives remain unchanged, Odysseus observes with the diplomatic caution of someone trying to steer potentially explosive conversations toward practical considerations. Troy's walls still stand, their defenders still resist our advances. Troy's walls are irrelevant, you correct him, with the kind of flat certainty that makes strategic discussions feel like philosophical debates. I'm not here to capture cities. I'm here to kill Hector. The declaration hangs in the air like a challenge thrown down in front of witnesses. Not conquest, not glory, not the successful completion of military objectives, just the simple, personal goal of ending one specific life in revenge for another. Hector is a formidable opponent, Ajax points out, with the kind of practical concern that military leaders develop when discussing potentially suicidal missions. Hector is a dead man, you reply with the same flat certainty. The only question is how many other Trojans die before I reach him. It's a promise rather than a threat, delivered with the kind of calm confidence that comes from understanding your own capabilities and having no intention of allowing emotional considerations to limit their application. The meeting that follows covers logistics, strategy, and the 1,000 mundane details that transform personal vengeance into military operations. You'll need new armour. Divine smiths are notoriously particular about replacing their work, but your mother's connections should prove useful. You'll need to coordinate with existing battle plans. Revenge missions work better when they're integrated with broader tactical objectives. But beneath all the practical planning lies the simple, terrible truth that everyone understands but nobody speaks aloud. You're not rejoining this war to win it. You're rejoining it to ensure that specific people die in specific ways for specific reasons. Everything else, Greek victory, Trojan defeat, the successful completion of this generation-defining siege, is secondary to the fundamental goal of making Hector pay for what he did to Patroclus. That night you sit beside your friend's body in the tent that serves as temporary morgue, watching his face in the flickering lamplight and trying to process the reality of his absence. Death has given him a peacefulness that life never allowed. Patroclus was always moving, thinking, speaking, responding to the world with the kind of engaged energy that made stillness seem like a foreign concept. Now he's perfectly still, perfectly quiet, perfectly beyond the reach of anything you might say or do to bring him back. I should have been there, you tell his corpse, because guilt demands confession, even when confession serves no practical purpose. I should have been wearing that armour, fighting those battles, taking those risks. The dead, characteristically, offer no response to such admissions. Patroclus lies in silence, while you catalogue all the ways his death could have been prevented if you'd made different choices, acted with less pride, prioritised friendship over principle. I'm going to kill him, you continue, because promises to the dead feel like obligations that transcend normal moral limitations. Hector, I mean. I'm going to kill him in ways that make other warriors afraid to speak his name. It's a vow that feels both necessary and terrible, the kind of commitment that heroes make when grief transforms into something that threatens the natural order of things. But necessity and morality don't always align, especially when divine blood and supernatural abilities are involved in personal revenge schemes. The dawn that follows brings news that changes everything yet again. Your mother, Thetis, has commissioned new armour from Hephaestus himself. Not replacement equipment, but something entirely new, crafted specifically for the war you're about to wage against Troy's defenders. When the armour arrives, carried by sea nymphs who treat divine metallurgy with the reverence it deserves, you understand immediately that this isn't just protective equipment, it's a statement of intent. A work of art designed to ensure that everyone who sees it understands exactly what kind of force they're facing. The bronze gleams like captured sunlight, the leather is supple as silk, and the overall effect is magnificent enough to make observers forget that armour is supposed to be practical rather than beautiful. But this armour manages to be both. Functional protection, enhanced by divine craftsmanship, and maternal love. As you put it on for the first time, feeling the way it responds to your movements like a second skin designed by gods who understand the physics of legendary violence, you realise that your period of sitting in tents and maintaining principal positions has officially ended. Tomorrow, you'll return to the battlefield, not as the sulking hero who abandoned his army over questions of respect and authority, but as something considerably more dangerous, a grief-stricken demigod with supernatural abilities and a very specific list of people who need to die. Hector, somewhere behind Troy's walls, probably has no idea what's coming for him. But he's about to receive a comprehensive education in why killing the friends of legendary warriors is considered inadvisable by anyone with functioning survival instincts. Because nothing says proportional response like declaring personal war on an entire city because one of its princes killed your best friend in legitimate combat. The morning of your return to active duty arrives, with the kind of crystalline clarity that seems to occur only when the universe wants to ensure perfect visibility for impending catastrophes. The sky is cloudless, the air is still, and the light has that particular quality that makes bronze armour gleam like divine fire, and blood show up in sharp relief against pale sand. You wake before dawn, not because you need the extra time to prepare, but because sleep has become largely theoretical since Patroclus died. Grief, it turns out, is incompatible with rest. Your mind keeps circling back to conversations you'll never have again, battles he'll never fight beside you, the simple absence of someone who'd become essential to your sense of yourself as something more than a walking weapon. The new armour fits perfectly, of course. Divine craftsmanship doesn't accommodate imperfection, and Hephaestus has outdone himself in creating something that's simultaneously functional protection and artistic statement. Each piece bears scenes from your own life. Your training with Chiron, your conquests around Troy, even your time disguised as a princess on Syros. It's like wearing your own autobiography, assuming your autobiography involved considerably more violence than most people's. Magnificent, Briseis observes as she watches you complete the complex process of strapping on equipment designed by gods for someone who's planning to wage personal war against an entire city. And terrifying. Terrifying was the goal, you reply, because intimidation is often more efficient than actual violence, though you're prepared for both. Not terrifying to your enemies, she clarifies with the kind of gentle precision that makes uncomfortable truths feel like educational opportunities. Terrifying to your friends? It's a fair point. The person standing in your tent, wearing divine armour and radiating barely contained fury, probably bears only superficial resemblance to the man who used to discuss philosophy with Patroclus or trade sarcastic observations about military life. Grief has a way of burning away everything except the essential core of a person. And your essential core apparently consists primarily of supernatural combat abilities and an unlimited capacity for vengeance. My friends, you observe with the kind of detached objectivity that grief sometimes provides, will be safer once my enemies are dead. All of them? Briseis asks with the sort of practical concern that makes philosophical positions sound like logistical challenges. However many it takes, you reply, which is both completely honest and deeply concerning from a strategic perspective. The walk from your tent to the assembly point feels like a procession designed by the gods to announce the return of forces that normal mortals weren't meant to encounter. Your new armour catches the morning light in ways that make you visible from considerable distances, and the sound of divine bronze moving in perfect coordination creates a rhythmic accompaniment that turns simple walking into something ceremonial. Warriors stop their morning routines to stare as you pass. Conversations die mid-sentence, breakfast is abandoned half-eaten, and the general buzz of military camp life gives way to the kind of profound silence that accompanies the recognition of something unprecedented. "Is back," someone whispers, and the words spread through the ranks like ripples across still water. But it's not celebration in their voices. It's something closer to awe, mixed with apprehension. The Achilles who left them weeks ago had been proud, temperamental, but ultimately recognizable as someone operating within normal human parameters. The Achilles walking among them now radiates the kind of focused intensity that makes people wonder whether they're witnessing the return of a champion or the manifestation of something considerably more dangerous. Your myrmidons receive you with expressions that manage to combine relief, loyalty, and barely concealed nervousness. These men have spent weeks watching their legendary commander sit in his tent while their friends died in battles he could have won. Now he's returned, but he's returned changed, in ways that make victory seem certain and survival seem questionable. Lord Achilles, their new captain greets you with the kind of formal respect that suggests careful thought about appropriate protocols for addressing grief-stricken demigods. Just Achilles, you correct him, because formality feels like a barrier you don't have the patience to maintain. Are the men ready? Ready for what, Lord? He asks, clearly hoping for tactical guidance that might help him prepare his troops for whatever you're planning. Ready to follow me into battle against people who killed our friend, you reply, with the kind of simplicity that makes complex military operations sound like personal errands. Ready to demonstrate why killing myrmidons is considered inadvisable by anyone with functioning survival instincts. The men receive this guidance with the enthusiasm of professional soldiers who've been given permission to take their work personally. These warriors have spent months fighting for abstract concepts like glory and conquest. Now they're being offered the opportunity to fight for something considerably more concrete. Revenge for a man they'd respected and a principle they can understand. The assembly that gathers to witness your formal return to active duty represents every significant element of the Greek expeditionary force. Kings and princes, heroes and champions, common soldiers and specialized troops, all of them drawn by the prospect of seeing what the legendary Achilles looks like when he's operating under the influence of divine fury and personal loss. Agamemnon receives you with the careful dignity of someone who's not entirely sure whether he's greeting an ally or negotiating with a force of nature. Your reconciliation, such as it is, unfolds with the kind of formal courtesy that acknowledges practical necessities while avoiding uncomfortable discussions about pride, authority, and the human cost of political disputes. The army welcomes your return, he states with the measured tone of someone delivering prepared remarks. The army, you reply with equal formality, will benefit from my assistance in killing Trojans. It's not exactly a warm reunion, but it serves the functional purpose of establishing that your personal grievances with Agamemnon's leadership have been superseded by more immediate concerns about Hector's continued breathing. Our tactical situation has improved since your absence, Odysseus reports with the diplomatic phrasing that makes military disasters sound like learning experiences. Trojan confidence has grown, but their guard has also lowered. Their confidence is about to prove misplaced, you observe with the kind of matter-of-fact certainty that makes predictions sound like established facts. And their guard won't matter when I'm not trying to get past it. You're planning a direct assault? Ajax asks, with the practical concern of someone who's spent considerable time thinking about Troy's formidable defences. I'm planning to kill Hector, you correct him, with the precision of someone whose objectives don't require complex tactical planning. Everything else is just details. The strategy session that follows covers logistics, coordination, and the 1,000 mundane considerations that transform personal vengeance into military operations. Your approach will be direct. Advance to Troy's walls, challenge their defenders, kill anyone who stands between you and your primary target. It's not sophisticated. But sophistication feels like a luxury when grief is demanding immediate satisfaction. The men will follow you anywhere, Agamemnon assures you, with the kind of confidence that leaders develop when they have legendary weapons at their disposal. Bmi won't need to follow me anywhere, you reply with the same matter-of-fact certainty. They'll just need to stay out of my way while I work. Because this isn't really about military strategy or tactical coordination. This is about demonstrating to everyone involved, Greeks, Trojans, gods, and future generations who'll hear the stories, exactly what happens when someone kills Achilles' best friend while wearing Achilles' armour. The march toward Troy's walls begins with the kind of organized precision that the Greek army has perfected over months of siege warfare. Formations advance in coordinated waves, supporting units maintain proper spacing, and the overall movement has the mechanical efficiency of a war machine that's learned to operate with devastating effectiveness. But at the center of this military precision moves something that operates according to different rules entirely. You advance not with the measured pace of organized assault, but with the focused intensity of someone who's identified a specific target and intends to reach it regardless of conventional obstacles. The first Trojan defenders you encounter discover what it means to face someone who's treating warfare as a personal matter rather than a professional obligation. Your spear finds its targets with superintellectual precision, your sword cuts through enemy formations like a farmer's scythe through grain, and your presence on the battlefield transforms tactical engagement into something closer to natural disaster. Achilles has returned! The cry goes up from Troy's walls, carrying equal parts recognition and terror. But the person advancing toward their defenses isn't really the Achilles they remember. The proud, temperamental hero who could be bargained with, reasoned with, or at least predicted. This is something else entirely. Something that grief and divine enhancement have transformed into a walking manifestation of consequence for anyone who's harmed the people he cares about. The slaughter that follows unfolds with the kind of systematic efficiency that makes warfare look like craftsmanship. You don't fight your way through Trojan defenses so much as you process them, eliminating resistance with the methodical precision of someone who's treating obstacles as temporary inconveniences rather than serious challenges. Bodies accumulate behind you like a trail marking your progress toward the city. Not random casualties of chaotic battle, but the carefully selected remains of people who made the mistake of standing between you and your objective. Each death serves a purpose, contributes to the larger goal of establishing exactly what the cost will be for killing Patroclus. Lord Achilles, one of your myrmidons calls out during a brief pause in the systematic elimination of Trojan resistance. The men are having trouble keeping up. You pause in your advance to consider this logistical problem. Your divine enhancement allows you to move at speeds that normal humans find difficult to match, and your focus on reaching Hector has perhaps led you to lose track of the limitations that affect ordinary warriors. Then they should stay behind, you reply, with the kind of practical solution that avoids complicated coordination problems. This is personal business. But Lord, the warrior persists with the courage of someone who's served under you long enough to offer unsolicited tactical advice. You'll be facing the entire Trojan army alone. No, you correct him with the patient tone of someone explaining obvious facts to well-meaning but confused subordinates. I'll be facing everyone who stands between me and Hector. The Trojan army can choose whether that includes them. It's a distinction that feels important, even if the practical effect is identical. This isn't about conquering Troy or achieving military objectives. This is about reaching one specific person and ensuring that he experiences the full consequences of his decision to kill your friend. The advance continues, but now you move alone at the head of your forces, creating a kind of tactical situation that military theorists probably don't cover in their standard education. Behind you, the Greek army follows at a distance that allows them to exploit the gaps you create without requiring them to match your pace. Ahead of you, Trojan defenders face the choice between standing their ground against someone who's demonstrating supernatural combat abilities or retreating to positions where they might survive long enough to be useful. Most choose retreat, which is the sensible decision when facing someone who's treating their organized resistance like a minor inconvenience. The momentum of your advance carries you to Troy's main gates faster than anyone had anticipated, including yourself. What should have been a day-long assault requiring careful coordination and significant casualties becomes a morning's work for one grief-stricken hero with a very specific agenda. Standing before the massive bronze gates that have protected Troy for generations, you pause to consider your options. Breaking through by force is possible. Divine strength has its advantages when dealing with mortal engineering. But siege warfare is time-consuming, and time allows your target to prepare defenses, gather allies, or potentially escape to fight another day. Instead, you decide on a more direct approach. "Hector!" you call out, your voice carrying across the walls with the kind of authority that makes personal challenges impossible to ignore. "Prince Hector of Troy, come out and face me!" The silence that follows your challenge is profound and uncomfortable. Everyone, Greek soldiers, Trojan defenders, civilians watching from the walls, understands that what's happening here isn't normal military engagement, but something considerably more personal and dangerous. You killed my friend, you continue, because clarity seems important when issuing mortal challenges to enemy heroes. You stripped his body of armour that belonged to me. You treated his courage like foolishness and his death like entertainment. Your voice echoes off Troy's stones with the kind of resonance that makes accusations sound like divine pronouncements. Behind the walls you can sense the movement of people, trying to decide whether this situation requires military response or diplomatic negotiation. "I've come to collect what you owe," you call out with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone presenting an invoice for services rendered. "Your life, your honour, and my armour, in that order." It's not the most sophisticated challenge ever issued, but sophistication feels less important than clarity when you're standing outside the gates of the most fortified city in the world, demanding single combat with its greatest defender. The gates remain closed, the walls stay silent, and gradually you begin to understand that Hector isn't going to accept your challenge immediately. Prudence, after all, is a virtue that keeps heroes alive, and facing someone who's just carved a path through an entire army while radiating divine fury probably falls outside the parameters of reasonable risk assessment. But patience has never been your strongest virtue, and grief has made it even scarcer. If Hector won't come out to face you, you'll simply have to provide additional motivation for him to reconsider his position. The assault on Troy's gates that follows isn't really a siege so much as a sustained demonstration of what divine enhancement can accomplish when applied to architectural problems. Your spear strikes bronze with the force of lightning, your sword cuts stone like wood, and gradually the defences that have protected Troy for centuries begin to show signs of structural stress. "Someone," you call out between impacts that sound like thunder, "should probably mention to Prince Hector that I'm going to keep doing this until he comes out to fight me." It's a reasonable warning, delivered with the kind of helpful courtesy that makes threats sound like public service announcements. Behind the walls, you can hear the sounds of urgent conferences, rapid footsteps, and the general commotion that occurs when cities try to figure out how to deal with one angry hero who's apparently capable of dismantling their fortifications through personal determination and supernatural strength. The answer, when it comes, arrives in the form of arrows from the walls, dozens of them fired by Troy's finest archers in a coordinated attempt to end your siege through conventional means. The arrows bounce off your divine armour like raindrops hitting bronze, creating a series of metallic pings that provide a rhythmic accompaniment to your continued assault on the gates. It's almost musical, in a way that would be more appreciable if you weren't busy using divine weapons to solve architectural problems. "That's not working," you call out helpfully, because constructive feedback seems appropriate when people are making obvious tactical errors. "You might want to try a different approach." The different approach, when it manifests, comes in the form of the gates themselves opening to reveal not Hector, but King Priam, looking every inch the dignified monarch, despite the circumstances that have brought him to negotiate with someone who's been systematically dismantling his city's defences. "Achilles," he greets you with the kind of formal courtesy that suggests royal training in diplomatic crisis management. "Your Majesty," you reply with equal formality, because respect for age and office feels appropriate even during personal vengeance missions. "You're here for my son," he states with the direct approach that comes from understanding exactly what kind of conversation this is going to be. "I'm here to kill your son," you correct gently, because precision in language prevents unfortunate misunderstandings. "For killing my friend while wearing my armour." Priam nods with the kind of weary acceptance that comes from ruling a city under siege and losing family members to the demands of heroic warfare. Hector acted in defense of his city and his people. Surely you can understand the obligations of duty. "I understand that duty doesn't excuse the consequences," you reply with the patient tone of someone explaining moral philosophy to well-meaning but confused students. "And the consequence of killing Patroclus is that I kill Hector, even if it means destroying the peace that wise men seek. There is no peace while the man who killed my friend continues breathing," you explain with the kind of logical precision that makes personal positions sound like universal principles. "But there can be peace afterward, assuming anyone's interested. It's a negotiation conducted under circumstances that make compromise seem unlikely, but both parties maintain the courteous formality that Bronze Age diplomacy requires, even during discussions about inevitable violence. "What would you require," Priam asks carefully, "to consider alternatives to personal combat?" "Hector's life," you reply immediately, "because your requirements haven't changed since this conversation began. Delivered by his own hand, or mine, but delivered nonetheless." "And if I were to refuse this requirement?" You gesture toward the damaged gates, the arrow-scarred ground, the obvious evidence of what one determined hero can accomplish when grief provides motivation and divine enhancement provides means. "Then I continue what I'm doing until either Hector comes out to face me or I come in to find him," you explain, with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone discussing inevitable natural processes. "Either outcome serves my purposes." Priam studies you for a long moment, clearly evaluating options that range from difficult to catastrophic. When he speaks again, his voice carries the weight of decisions that kings make when all their choices involve losing something precious. Take a moment to read the following, the first 3 lines of the script. "We've got heat. I'll speak with my son," he says finally. You do that. You agree with the kind of helpful encouragement that makes ultimatums sound like friendly suggestions. "And while you're speaking with him, you might mention that I'll be right here, working on these gates until he decides to join our conversation." The king withdraws with the dignity that comes from understanding when negotiations have reached their practical limits. Behind him, the gates close with the kind of finality that suggests the next time they open, it will be to release something considerably more dangerous than diplomatic envoys. You resume your assault on Troy's defences with the methodical persistence of someone who's treating structural engineering as a form of meditation. Each strike brings you closer to your goal. Each impact demonstrates your commitment to seeing this through, regardless of conventional obstacles. Inside the city, Hector is undoubtedly having conversations about duty, honour, and the obligations that heroes bear to protect their people from monsters who can dismantle fortifications through personal determination. Outside the city, you continue your patient work of providing motivation for those conversations to reach productive conclusions. Because nothing says reasonable diplomatic solution like threatening to tear down a city's walls until its greatest hero agrees to fight you in single combat. The morning of what will prove to be Hector's final day begins with the kind of crystalline clarity that the gods seem to reserve for events they want mortals to remember clearly. Not a cloud mars the perfect blue sky, not a breath of wind disturbs the banners that hang from Troy's walls, and the light has that particular quality that makes everything look like it's been arranged for maximum dramatic effect. You've been camped outside Troy's gates for 3 days now, maintaining what could generously be called a siege and what might more accurately be described as an extended ultimatum with architectural damage. Your patient assault on the city's defences has created several notable gaps in stonework that took generations to build, and the psychological pressure of having someone demonstrably capable of dismantling their city waiting outside has begun to tell on the defenders. The answer to your challenge, when it finally comes, arrives in the form of the gates opening to reveal not envoys or negotiators, but Hector himself. Prince Hector of Troy stands in the gateway, like the embodiment of everything a hero should be. Tall, noble, magnificent in the armour he's taken from your friend's corpse. Your armour, actually, though seeing divine bronze on his shoulders creates feelings that transcend simple property disputes and move into territory that threatens the structural integrity of your self-control. Achilles, he greets you with the kind of formal courtesy that heroes maintain, even when they're about to try to kill each other. Hector, you reply with equal formality, though your voice carries undertones that make simple greetings sound like death sentences. He steps clear of the gates with the measured pace of someone who's made peace with what's about to happen. Behind him, the entrance to Troy closes with the kind of finality that suggests this conversation will be conducted without audience interference or strategic retreat. You've come for vengeance, he observes, with a direct approach that comes from understanding exactly what kind of encounter this is going to be. I've come to collect what you owe me, you correct with the precision of someone presenting an itemized invoice. My armour, my friend's honour, and your life. In that order, Hector asks with what might be humour if the circumstances were different. In whatever order proves convenient, you reply, because flexibility in execution details feels appropriate when the final objective is clear. The space between Troy's walls and the Greek lines has become an impromptu arena, watched by thousands of soldiers and civilians who understand they're witnessing something that will be discussed for generations. This isn't just two heroes fighting over personal grievances. This is the kind of single combat that shapes the outcome of wars and provides material for epic poetry. Before we begin, Hector says with the careful formality of someone who wants to ensure that important matters are addressed before violence makes conversation impossible, I want you to know that I regret your friend's death. So you ask with the kind of polite interest that makes questions feel like challenges. He fought bravely, Hector continues with the respect that warriors show for worthy opponents. He died well, facing his enemies rather than fleeing from them. His courage deserved better than the deception that brought him to that moment. It's a gracious acknowledgement, delivered with the kind of dignity that makes compliments feel like apologies. Under different circumstances, you might appreciate the gesture of respect for Patroclus's memory. His courage, you reply, with the patient tone of someone correcting fundamental misunderstandings, deserved better than being dismissed by the man who killed him. I spoke in anger, Hector admits, with the honest recognition that heroes sometimes show when they've made mistakes. Heat of battle, stress of command, your friend's impersonation was unexpected. My friend's courage was genuine, you correct with the kind of precision that makes moral distinctions clear. Whether he was wearing my armour or his own. Yes, Hector agrees, with immediate acceptance. You're right. I spoke poorly, and I regret those words as much as I regret the necessity that led to his death. It's the closest thing to an apology that heroic pride allows, delivered with sincerity that transcends the formal requirements of pre-combat courtesy. If circumstances were different, if your friend were still alive, if grief hadn't transformed into something that demands blood payment, this might be the beginning of reconciliation, rather than the prelude to homicide. But circumstances are what they are. Patroclus is dead, and grief has very specific requirements about the forms that justice should take. Your regret, you observe with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing weather patterns, doesn't bring him back. No, Hector agrees with the kind of weary acceptance that comes from understanding exactly how this conversation is going to end. It doesn't. Then let's dispense with regrets and move on to consequences, you suggest with the helpful directness of someone eager to transition from discussion to action. The combat that follows unfolds with the kind of systematic precision that comes from divine enhancement meeting legendary skill, under circumstances where only one participant can survive the encounter. Hector fights magnificently, every technique perfect, every strategy sound, every movement demonstrating why he's considered Troy's greatest defender. But magnificence isn't enough when facing someone whose capabilities transcend normal human limitations. Your spear finds gaps in his defense that shouldn't exist, your sword moves faster than reaction time should allow, and gradually the gulf between mortal excellence and supernatural ability becomes apparent to everyone watching from the walls. Hector adapts his tactics with the fluid intelligence that marks truly gifted warriors, shifting from aggressive assault to defensive maneuvering to desperate innovation as each approach proves insufficient. He's fighting for his life with every skill he possesses, every lesson he's learned, every advantage that experience and training can provide. It's not enough. The spear thrust that ends his life comes almost gently, sliding between plates of armour with the kind of precision that makes killing look like craftsmanship rather than violence. Hector's eyes meet yours in the moment when bronze penetrates flesh, and his expression carries recognition rather than surprise. Understanding that this outcome was predetermined by forces beyond either of your control. "Tell my father," he begins, but the words trail off as strength leaves him, and consciousness fades into whatever waits beyond the struggles of mortal existence. He dies well, as heroes should, bravely, with dignity, facing his enemy rather than fleeing from inevitable defeat. Under different circumstances, his death might inspire respect, admiration, perhaps even a measure of grief, for the loss of someone who embodied the best qualities that warfare can produce. Instead, it feels like the completion of a transaction that was overdue since the moment Patroclus breathed his last. Standing over Hector's corpse, wearing armour crafted by gods and splattered with the blood of Troy's greatest defender, you should feel satisfaction. Justice has been served. Vengeance has been achieved. The man who killed your friend has paid the price that such actions demand. But satisfaction feels inadequate when measured against the scope of what you've lost. Hector's death doesn't bring Patroclus back, doesn't fill the emptiness that his absence has created, doesn't restore the friendship that made everything else in your life feel worthwhile. What it does do is provide raw material for the kind of anger that transforms grief into something considerably more dangerous. The desecration that follows isn't planned so much as it emerges from needs that transcend rational decision-making. Stripping Hector's corpse of your armour feels like reclaiming stolen property. Piercing his ankles and threading rope through the wounds feels like practical preparation for what comes next. Tying him to your chariot feels like the beginning of a demonstration that everyone involved will remember for the rest of their significantly shortened lives. Achilles, someone calls from the walls. King Priam, perhaps, or Queen Hecuba, or any of the family members who've just watched their champion die and are now witnessing the systematic violation of every convention that civilized people maintain about the treatment of heroic dead. You don't respond, because explanations feel like a luxury you can't afford when fury is demanding immediate expression through dramatic gesture. The chariot ride that follows takes you around Troy's walls at speeds that make the city's stones blur together into continuous impressions of ancient architecture and accumulated human ambition. Behind you, Hector's body bounces and drags across ground that transforms from packed earth to rocky fragments to the kind of surface that doesn't improve corpses through contact. Each circuit of the city serves a purpose beyond simple transportation. This is education, demonstration, the kind of visual lesson that makes abstract concepts like the consequences of killing Achilles' friends concrete enough for even the densest observer to understand. The sounds that echo from Troy's walls during this display aren't the cheers of enemy soldiers watching their champion receive posthumous honours. They're the cries of people witnessing something that transcends normal warfare and moves into territory that makes even seasoned warriors uncomfortable. Enough! The voice carries across the plain with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, though obedience isn't a concept you're particularly interested in at the moment. You slow your chariot to see who's presumptuous enough to interrupt your demonstration of what happens to people who harm Patroclus. The answer proves to be your own commanders: Agamemnon, Odysseus, Ajax, and several others who've apparently decided that intervention is necessary, despite the obvious risks involved in interfering with grief-stricken demigods. The man is dead, Agamemnon states with the kind of obvious observation that suggests he's not entirely sure how to approach this situation. Very, you agree, with the matter-of-fact acknowledgement of established facts. The desecration serves no strategic purpose, Odysseus adds with the practical concern that military leaders develop when tactics become counterproductive. It serves my purpose, you correct, with the precision of someone whose strategic objectives extend beyond conventional military thinking. Which is, Ajax asks, with the direct approach that comes from years of dealing with temperamental heroes. Ensuring that everyone understands the cost of killing people I care about, you explain with the helpful clarity of someone providing educational services. Current and future reference. It's a reasonable explanation for behaviour that might otherwise seem excessive, though reasonableness is apparently in the eye of the beholder when divine enhancement meets personal loss. The gods are displeased, one of the minor kings observes with the nervous concern of someone who's noticed divine attention and found it wanting. The gods, you reply, with the kind of dismissive confidence that comes from having divine relatives, can express their displeasure directly if they have concerns about my methods. As if summoned by your casual blasphemy, the air around your chariot suddenly feels different, heavier, charged with the kind of supernatural tension that announces immortal intervention in mortal affairs. Apollo appears not dramatically, but gradually, like sunlight resolving into human form, until he's standing beside your chariot with the expression of someone who's tired of watching excessive behaviour and has decided to provide corrective guidance. Achilles, he says with the kind of divine authority that makes suggestions sound like commands. Apollo, you reply with the respectful courtesy that prudent mortals maintain when addressing Olympic deities, even when those deities have previously interfered in ways that resulted in the deaths of best friends. This display has gone far enough, the god states with the direct approach that immortals use when they've decided that subtle hints aren't sufficient. Has it, you ask with genuine curiosity about divine standards for appropriate vengeance demonstrations? Hector is dead, Apollo points out with the same talent for obvious observation that your mortal commanders demonstrated. Your friend is avenged. The requirements of justice have been satisfied. Have they? You ask with the kind of philosophical interest that makes divine pronouncements feel like topics for debate. Because justice feels like it should involve bringing Patroclus back to life, and I notice that hasn't happened yet. Apollo regards you with the expression of someone who's just been reminded that mortals don't always accept divine wisdom with appropriate gratitude. The dead don't return, Achilles. Not for you, not for anyone. Then justice, you observe with the logical precision that divine education apparently encourages, becomes a matter of ensuring that the living understand the consequences of creating more dead. Through desecrating corpses, through comprehensive demonstration, you clarify, because accuracy in terminology feels important when discussing moral philosophy with immortal beings. Apollo's expression suggests that your philosophical approach to grief management isn't meeting with divine approval, though disapproval from the god who enabled Patroclus's death feels less meaningful than it might under different circumstances. Return the body to his family, Apollo commands, with the kind of direct authority that doesn't typically tolerate disagreement. No, you reply with equal directness, because divine commands don't automatically supersede personal grievances, especially when those grievances involve dead best friends. The silence that follows this refusal is profound and uncomfortable. Around you, Greek commanders exchange glances that suggest they're reconsidering their decision to intervene in conversations between legendary heroes and Olympic deities. Above you, the sky seems to darken slightly, as if the universe itself is holding its breath to see what happens when mortal grief refuses to accept divine guidance. I could compel your obedience, Apollo observes with the kind of mild threat that gods use when they want to remind mortals about the disparity in their respective power levels. You could try, you agree with the respectful acknowledgement of theoretical possibilities, but compelling obedience and achieving compliance aren't always the same thing. It's a subtle distinction, but one that highlights the complications that arise when supernatural abilities meet unlimited grievance under circumstances where conventional authority structures don't necessarily apply. Apollo considers this response with the expression of someone who's just been reminded that some problems don't have simple solutions, even for beings who can reshape reality through personal preference. 3 days, he says finally, apparently deciding that compromise serves everyone's interests better than extended conflict. You may keep the body for 3 days. After that, it must be returned to Troy for proper burial. And if I refuse? Then you'll discover what divine displeasure looks like when it's no longer theoretical, Apollo replies, with the kind of matter-of-fact certainty that makes warnings sound like promises. It's a reasonable compromise, actually, enough time to process your grief through whatever means seem appropriate, but not enough time for the situation to become permanently problematic from a cosmic perspective. 3 days, you agree, because negotiation with gods requires flexibility, and 3 days feels sufficient for most forms of therapeutic violence. Apollo disappears as gradually as he arrived, leaving behind only the lingering sense that divine attention remains focused on your behavior and its implications for universal order. Well, Odysseus observes with the dry humor that military leaders use to diffuse tension after uncomfortable encounters with supernatural authority, that went better than it could have. Did it? You ask with genuine curiosity about alternative outcomes for divine intervention scenarios. Is still alive, Agamemnon points out with the practical observation that survival often constitutes success when gods become involved in mortal disputes. So far, you agree, though survival feels less important than completion of your educational demonstration about the consequences of harming people you care about. The 3 days that follow unfold with the kind of systematic thoroughness that grief demands when it's given official permission to express itself through dramatic gesture. Each dawn brings another circuit of Troy's walls. Another demonstration of what happens to the bodies of people who kill your friends. Another lesson in the practical applications of divine enhancement to problems of public education. By the end of the third day, even the most casual observer understands exactly what it costs to harm the people Achilles considers family. But understanding and acceptance are different things, and the temporary satisfaction of completed vengeance doesn't fill the permanent emptiness that Patroclus's absence has created in the center of your existence. Standing beside your chariot as the sun sets on your final day of authorized desecration, you find yourself facing the uncomfortable truth that grief doesn't end just because justice has been served. Hector is dead. Troy understands the consequences of killing your friend, and you're still alone in a world that suddenly feels considerably less worth inhabiting. Tomorrow, you'll have to return Hector's body and figure out what comes next for someone whose primary reason for living has been systematically eliminated by enemy action. Tonight, though, you sit beside Patroclus's remains in your tent and try to process the reality that even perfect vengeance doesn't bring back the dead. Because nothing says proportional response like dragging a corpse around a city for 3 days to teach everyone a lesson about friendship that no one needed to learn. The morning after your 3-day educational tour around Troy's walls brings the kind of obligations that heroes face when divine commands must be obeyed and royal corpses must be returned to their grieving families. Apollo's deadline has arrived, with the punctuality that gods maintain when they're monitoring mortal compliance, and even grief-stricken demigods must eventually acknowledge the practical limitations of unauthorized body retention. But before Hector's remains can be returned to Troy for whatever burial rites the Trojans consider appropriate for dramatically desecrated princes, there are more immediate obligations that require your attention. Specifically the funeral of Patroclus, which has been delayed while you pursued therapeutic vengeance, but can't be postponed indefinitely without violating the kinds of religious protocols that bring down curses on entire armies. The pyre that your men have constructed represents weeks of careful preparation and considerable expense. Not the simple cremation that ordinary soldiers receive, but something worthy of someone who died wearing your armour and fighting your battles while you sulked in your tent about wounded pride. The structure rises 20 feet into the morning sky, built from the finest woods that a besieging army can acquire through creative requisition and enthusiastic foraging. Cedar from Lebanon, oak from sacred groves, pine that still carries the scent of mountain forests. All of it arranged with the kind of architectural precision that makes functional structures look like monuments to friendship and loss. It's magnificent, Briseis observes, as she surveys the completed construction with the critical eye of someone who's witnessed royal funerals and understands the visual language of grief made public. It's appropriate, you correct, because magnificence feels inadequate when measured against the scope of what you're trying to accomplish. Around the base of the pyre, your men have arranged offerings that represent everything Patroclus valued during his life. Weapons for the warrior he was, wine for the evenings you'd shared discussing strategy and philosophy, honey for the sweetness he'd brought to relationships that might otherwise have been purely professional, gold and bronze and ivory, not because he was acquisitive, but because valuable things should accompany valuable people into whatever waits beyond the struggles of mortal existence. The body itself rests at the pyre's centre, cleaned and prepared according to traditions that stretch back to the earliest heroes. Patroclus looks peaceful in death, wearing the expression of someone who's finally been released from the obligations and anxieties that define military life. If you didn't know better, you might think he was simply sleeping deeply after a long day of training or battle. But you do know better, and the knowledge sits in your chest like a physical weight that makes breathing feel like conscious effort. The men are ready, the captain of your myrmidons reports, with the formal courtesy that soldiers maintain when addressing commanders whose emotional state might be described as structurally unsound. Then let's begin, you reply, because delay serves no purpose when grief is demanding public expression and divine protocol requires proper observance of funeral rites. The ceremony that follows unfolds with the kind of ritualistic precision that Bronze Age religion demands when heroes die and their friends need cosmic assistance in processing loss. Libations are poured, prayers are offered, and sacrifices are made to ensure that Patroclus's spirit receives appropriate guidance in navigating whatever challenges await the heroic dead. But beneath the formal requirements of religious observance lies something more personal and more painful. The simple fact that you're saying goodbye to the person who understood you better than anyone else ever had or ever would. He was the finest of us, Ajax declares during the formal eulogy, his voice carrying across the assembled army with the authority of someone whose own heroic credentials lend weight to his assessments of others' worth. The bravest, Odysseus adds with the kind of specific praise that comes from having witnessed courage under circumstances where cowardice would have been safer. The most human, you say when your turn comes to speak, and the words feel both true and inadequate for everything you're trying to express. Because that was what made Patroclus special, wasn't it? Not supernatural abilities or divine bloodlines or legendary reputations, but the simple capacity to remain human despite spending his life surrounded by people who were becoming something else entirely. He'd seen you at your worst, proud, temperamental, increasingly isolated by your own mythological status, and had somehow managed to treat you like a person rather than a legend. The flame that consumes the pyre burns with unnatural intensity, fed by oils and resins that make ordinary fire look pale by comparison. Patroclus's body disappears into light and heat that transform flesh into smoke, physical presence into memory, companionship into the kind of permanent absence that defines loss for everyone who survives the people they love most. Standing beside the fire, watching your friend's remains become part of the sky, you understand with perfect clarity that something fundamental about your existence has just ended. Not your life, that continues, unfortunately, but your connection to the part of yourself that had still been recognizably human. From now on, you'll be exactly what people expect you to be. A legendary warrior, a force of nature, a walking manifestation of divine power and heroic violence. But you'll never again be someone's friend in the simple, uncomplicated way that had made everything else bearable. The games that follow the cremation represent your attempt to honor Patroclus's memory through the kind of competitive celebration that heroes appreciate: racing, wrestling, archery, spear throwing, all the martial skills that define excellence in your particular historical moment, transformed into contests that allow grief to express itself through familiar activities. The prizes, Odysseus observes as he surveys the collection of valuable objects you've assembled for distribution to the winners, are exceptionally generous. They are gold tripods, silver cups, bronze armour, horses whose bloodlines stretch back to divine stock. Everything valuable that you've accumulated during months of successful raiding, offered as rewards for athletic achievement in honour of someone who'll never participate in competition again. Patroclus deserves the best, you explain, with the simple logic of someone whose emotional state doesn't include room for economic considerations. He does. Ajax agrees with the immediate acceptance that comes from understanding exactly how grief operates when it has unlimited resources at its disposal. Though he might point out that feeding the army would be more practical than giving away fortunes in prize money, is exactly the sort of observation Patroclus would make, delivered with the gentle irony he'd used when pointing out the gap between your dramatic gestures and their practical effects. The accuracy of the mimicry hits you harder than you'd expected, forcing you to recognize how much of your conversation had relied on his voice providing balance to your enthusiasms. Practical, you muse, with the kind of bitter amusement that grief sometimes provides. Yes, that sounds like something he'd say. The competitions themselves unfold with the kind of organized chaos that athletic events produce when heroes compete for valuable prizes in honor of dead friends. Men throw spears with desperate intensity, race horses with reckless determination, and wrestle with the kind of commitment that suggests they understand this is about more than simple entertainment. You participate in some events, judge others, and generally try to maintain the kind of dignified presence that hosts should provide when grief is being processed through public spectacle. But your heart isn't really in the competition, and everyone can tell. You're not enjoying this, Briseis observes during a brief pause in the festivities, her voice carrying the kind of gentle concern that makes obvious statements feel like invitations to honest conversation. Enjoying seems like the wrong word, you admit, because pleasure feels inappropriate when the occasion that inspired these games involved your friend's violent death. Then why organize them? It's a reasonable question, and one that requires you to consider motivations that might not be entirely rational. Why spend enormous sums on athletic competitions when the person being honoured can't appreciate them? Why gather the army for celebration when the cause for gathering involves irreversible loss? Because he would have wanted us to, you say finally, and the words feel both true and inadequate, and because I need to do something that looks like moving forward, even if I'm not actually moving anywhere. Grief disguised as progress, Briseis suggests with the kind of insight that makes psychological observation sound like philosophical education. Something like that, you agree, though disguise implies intentional deception, and you're not sure whether you're trying to fool others or yourself. The wrestling competition proves particularly intense, perhaps because physical struggle provides an outlet for emotions that don't translate well into words. Men grapple with desperate energy, each bout becoming a kind of proxy for larger conflicts between grief and acceptance, loss and continuation, the demands of moving forward and the desire to remain frozen in moments when everything still made sense. Ajax wins as expected. His size and strength make him nearly unbeatable in contests that reward raw physical power. But even victory feels muted when achieved in honour of someone who won't be there to congratulate the winner or mock the losers with gentle good humour. Patroclus would have made jokes about your technique, you tell Ajax as you present him with his prize, a silver mixing bowl whose craftsmanship represents months of skilled labour. Probably, Ajax agrees with the kind of sad smile that acknowledgement of shared loss produces. He had opinions about everyone's form. Usually correct opinions, you add, because accuracy and criticism had been one of Patroclus's most annoying and valuable qualities. Usually, Ajax confirms, then pauses, with the expression of someone who's remembered something important. He had opinions about yours too, you know. My what? Your technique, Ajax clarifies with the careful tone of someone delivering information that might be received poorly. Your approach to, well, everything, really, but especially your tendency to treat other people's problems as extensions of your personal mythology. It's the kind of observation that Patroclus might have made if he were still alive to make observations, delivered with the gentle honesty that had made his friendship both valuable and occasionally uncomfortable. Hearing it second-hand, from someone who'd witnessed those conversations but hadn't participated in them, feels like receiving a message from the dead. What did he say? You ask, though you're not entirely sure you want to know the answer. You were the finest warrior he'd ever seen, Ajax reports with the diplomatic phrasing that suggests he's editing for content and tone. But that your success was making you forget that other people weren't supporting characters in your personal epic. The observation cuts deeper than you'd expected, partly because it's accurate and partly because it comes with the weight of final judgment. Patroclus will never have the opportunity to see whether you learn from his criticism, never know whether his death teaches you anything about the value of treating friendship as more important than reputation. He was right, you admit, because honesty feels like the minimum tribute you can offer to someone whose own honesty had been one of his defining characteristics. He usually was, Ajax agrees, with the kind of acceptance that comes from having known Patroclus well enough to appreciate his judgment. The question is, what you plan to do with being right. It's a fair question, and one that you're not sure how to answer. What do you do with accurate criticism delivered by someone who's no longer alive to witness whether you implement his suggestions? How do you honour friendship by becoming a better person, when the person whose opinion mattered most will never know about your improvement? The spear-throwing competition provides temporary distraction from such philosophical complexities. Men take turns hurling bronze-tipped ashwood at targets that represent various forms of martial skill, and the familiar rhythms of athletic achievement create the illusion that life continues according to normal patterns, despite fundamental changes in its underlying structure. You win, of course. Divine enhancement tends to make contests of physical skill rather one-sided, and your spear travels distances that mortal arms can't achieve under normal circumstances. But victory feels hollow when the person whose approval would have made it meaningful isn't there to provide commentary on your form or joke about your tendency to show off. Magnificent throw, Agamemnon observes, with the kind of diplomatic praise that leaders offer when they want to acknowledge achievement without addressing the emotional context that makes achievement feel meaningless. Adequate, you correct, because precision in language feels important when grief is making everything feel inadequate compared to what you've lost. The chariot racing proves more interesting, partly because it requires skill rather than raw physical power, and partly because horses don't care about their drivers' emotional states. The competition unfolds with genuine excitement as teams navigate the course that's been laid out across the plain, their success depending on training, tactics, and the kind of partnership between human and animal that can't be faked or forced. Diomedes wins after a race that features several spectacular crashes, one minor injury, and the kind of photo finish that makes observers argue about the results for hours afterward. His victory speech includes appropriate recognition of Patroclus's memory and gracious acknowledgement of the other competitor's skill, demonstrating the kind of good sportsmanship that athletic competition supposedly encourages. Patroclus would have bet on the dark horses, you observe as you present Diomedes with his prize, a bronze tripod whose legs are carved with scenes of heroic achievement. Would he have won, Diomedes asks with the curiosity of someone who's always interested in tactical analysis. Usually, you admit, because Patroclus had possessed an uncanny ability to identify overlooked potential in people, animals, and strategic situations. He saw things that other people missed. Including things about you, Diomedes suggests, with the kind of gentle probing that suggests he's heard stories about your friend's talent for uncomfortable honesty. Especially things about me, you confirm, because self-awareness feels like the minimum tribute you can offer to someone whose friendship had been based partly on his willingness to point out your character flaws. The archery competition concludes the formal games, providing a final opportunity for athletic achievement in honor of someone who'd appreciated skill in all its forms. Arrows fly toward targets with varying degrees of accuracy, and prizes are distributed according to performance that ranges from impressive to embarrassing. Merion's wins with a display of marksmanship that makes arrows look like extensions of his will rather than separate objects subject to physics and wind resistance. His technique is flawless, his concentration absolute, and his final shot hits dead center at a distance that makes other competitors question their life choices. Patroclus always said archery was the most honest of the martial arts, you tell Meriones as you award him his prize, a golden cup whose surface is decorated with hunting scenes. Honest? Meriones asks, with the curiosity of someone who's interested in philosophical approaches to weapons training. No hiding behind armour or reputation, you explain, repeating observations that Patroclus had made during countless evenings of tactical discussion. Just you, your skill, and the target. Success or failure becomes immediately obvious to everyone watching. Sounds like something he'd say, Meriones agrees, with the kind of recognition that comes from having known Patroclus well enough to appreciate his perspective on martial philosophy. Hike does, you confirm, and the words carry more weight than you'd expected. As the games conclude, and the prizes are distributed, you find yourself standing alone beside the remains of Patroclus's pyre. The fire has burned down to embers and ash, transforming what had been an elaborate architectural structure into the kind of simple mound that marks the end of all human ambition. Tomorrow there will be obligations to fulfill and decisions to make about your continued participation in this war. Hector's body must be returned to Troy, diplomatic protocols must be observed, and the siege must continue according to whatever strategic plans survive the personal disruptions that heroic grief creates. But tonight you sit beside your friend's ashes and try to process the reality that some losses are permanent, some friendships are irreplaceable, and some forms of damage can't be repaired through vengeance or athletic achievement or any other activity that makes moving forward feel like progress rather than abandonment. The stars above shine with the same indifferent beauty they displayed when Patroclus was alive to observe them, and their constancy feels both comforting and terrible. The universe continues according to its own vast patterns, unaffected by personal loss or individual grief, maintaining the same cosmic rhythms that will outlast everyone who currently draws breath. Somewhere in Troy, Hector's family prepares for his return and burial. Somewhere in the Greek camp, soldiers settle down for sleep that will be troubled by dreams of friends who won't wake up tomorrow. Somewhere in your own chest, the absence of Patroclus creates a hollow space that nothing will ever fill again. But for now, in this moment between the end of commemoration and the beginning of whatever comes next, you sit in silence and remember what it felt like to have a friend who saw you clearly and cared about you anyway. Because nothing says healthy processing of grief like spending enormous sums on athletic competitions that the dead person can't enjoy, then sitting alone beside their ashes, wondering how friendship becomes memory and what memory becomes after that. The morning after the funeral games arrives with the kind of persistent inevitability that time maintains, regardless of personal preferences or emotional readiness. You wake in your tent to find that the world has continued existing, despite fundamental changes in its value and meaning, and that obligations wait with the patience of creditors who know their debts will eventually be paid. The most immediate of these obligations involves honouring your agreement with Apollo about the timely return of Hector's remains to his grieving family. Divine commands don't typically include extension clauses for emotional processing, and gods tend to interpret delays as challenges to their authority rather than symptoms of complicated grief. Hector's body lies wrapped in fine linen outside your tent, cleaned and prepared according to traditions that Bronze Age religion prescribes for the heroic dead. 3 days of educational dragging around Troy's walls have left their mark, but divine intervention has preserved enough dignity that his family will be able to conduct proper funeral rites without excessive trauma. The Trojans have sent envoys, Patroclus's replacement reports with the careful neutrality that soldiers maintain when delivering information that might trigger unpredictable emotional responses from grief-stricken commanders. Have they? You reply with the polite interest you've developed for diplomatic communications that don't directly involve killing people who harmed your friends. King Priam himself, the captain clarifies, with the emphasis that suggests royal involvement elevates routine body exchanges into significant political events. With a full diplomatic escort and enough gold to ransom several cities. The irony isn't lost on you. Priam is offering treasure to buy back his son's corpse, when the real price of that corpse has already been paid in full through the permanent absence of the person you cared about most in the world. Gold can purchase many things, but it can't resurrect dead friends or restore relationships that enemy action has permanently severed. Tell them I'll meet with the king, you decide, because courtesy to grieving parents feels like the minimum standard of civilized behavior, even when those parents raised sons who killed your best friends. "Here, Lord?" the captain asks with the kind of careful attention to protocol that military life demands. "Here," you confirm, because your tent has become the centre of everything that matters to you now. The place where Patroclus's ashes rest in their golden urn, where his weapons wait unused, where the absence of his voice makes every conversation feel incomplete. The meeting that follows unfolds with the kind of formal dignity that Bronze Age diplomacy requires when kings must negotiate with heroes over the bodies of their dead children. Priam enters your tent with the bearing of someone who's spent decades mastering the art of maintaining royal authority under impossible circumstances. He's older than you'd expected, grey-bearded and worn by years of ruling a city under siege. But his eyes hold the kind of intelligent determination that explains how Troy has resisted the finest army ever assembled, and his presence fills your tent with something that transcends simple political authority. "Achilles," he greets you with the respectful courtesy that diplomatic protocol requires. "Your Majesty," you reply with equal formality, rising from your seat beside Patroclus's urn because respect for age and office transcends personal grievances. "I've come for my son," Priam states with the direct approach that comes from understanding exactly what kind of conversation this needs to be. "I know," you reply, because his mission has been obvious since the moment he appeared outside your tent with enough treasure to purchase small kingdoms. The silence that follows stretches between you like a bridge across different kinds of loss. Priam mourns a son who died defending his city and his people. You mourn a friend who died wearing your armour and fighting your battles, while you maintained principled positions about respect and authority. Both losses are real, both are permanent, and both result from decisions that seemed reasonable at the time, but proved catastrophic in retrospect. "I know what it means to lose someone irreplaceable," Priam says finally, his voice carrying the weight of experience that transcends royal dignity and moves into territory that all grieving people share. "Do you?" you ask, with genuine curiosity about whether his loss compares to yours in scope and significance. "I've lost 19 sons to this war," he explains with the kind of matter-of-fact acceptance that comes from having grief become a familiar companion rather than a shocking visitor. Hector was the finest of them, but he wasn't the first, and he probably won't be the last. 19 sons. The number hits you like a physical blow, forcing you to recalculate your assumptions about whose suffering deserves priority in conversations about loss and consequence. You've been operating under the theory that your grief is unique, unprecedented, the sort of loss that justifies unlimited retaliation against everyone responsible. But Priam has lost 19 children to this war, and he's still sitting in your tent negotiating diplomatic solutions rather than burning down the world in response to accumulated injustice. How do you bear it, you ask, because the question feels important, and he's the first person you've met who might have useful answers. "Badly," Priam admits with the kind of honesty that makes vulnerability feel like strength. "Some days are worse than others, some losses cut deeper than the rest. But bearing it badly is still bearing it, and someone must continue the work of being alive." "The work of being alive," you repeat, testing the phrase like it might contain wisdom you haven't considered. "Ruling my people, protecting my city, ensuring that my remaining children have futures worth living," Priam explains, with the practical focus that comes from understanding that grief must coexist with ongoing obligations. The work doesn't stop because we're tired of doing it. It's a perspective you hadn't considered. The idea that loss creates responsibilities rather than excuses, that surviving tragedy requires active effort rather than passive endurance. Your response to Patroclus's death has been largely destructive, killing Hector, desecrating his corpse, organizing expensive funeral games that honor memory through competitive consumption. But you haven't given much thought to what comes after vengeance, what purpose might fill the space that revenge has temporarily occupied. "Your son killed my friend," you state with the directness that difficult conversations require. "Yes," Priam agrees, without attempting excuses or justifications. "In battle, defending his city, fighting enemies who were trying to kill him. It was war, not murder." "It felt like murder," you reply with the honesty that grief demands. "I imagine it did," Priam acknowledges with the kind of empathy that transcends political allegiance. "Just as watching you drag my son's body around our walls felt like desecration rather than justice." The parallel is uncomfortable because it's accurate. Your educational demonstration about the consequences of harming your friends must have looked considerably different from Troy's perspective. Less like justified retaliation, and more like the kind of excessive cruelty that civilized people don't inflict on heroic dead. "I was angry," you explain, though explanation feels inadequate for behavior that exceeded normal standards of appropriate vengeance. "Understandably," Priam agrees, with immediate acceptance. Anger is the proper response to losing someone precious, but anger can be expressed in ways that create more loss or in ways that honor what's been lost. "Which was I doing?" you ask, though you suspect you already know the answer. "Both," Priam replies, with the diplomatic wisdom that comes from decades of navigating complex political situations. "And neither. Grief makes people do things that don't fit into normal categories of right and wrong. It's a generous assessment, more charitable than your behavior probably deserves. But generosity from unexpected sources has a way of highlighting the contrast between what you've received and what you've given in return. I'll return your son's body," you decide, because keeping it serves no purpose beyond prolonging suffering that's already exceeded any reasonable proportion. "I'm grateful," Priam says, with simple dignity that makes formal gratitude feel like personal connection. "And I'll accept your ransom," you continue, because diplomatic protocols exist for good reasons, and refusing royal gifts creates the kind of political complications that armies don't need. "Also appreciated," Priam acknowledges with the relief of someone who's achieved his primary objective through negotiation rather than conflict. But there's something else in his expression. Something that suggests this conversation has served purposes beyond the simple exchange of corpses for treasure. He's studying you with the attention of someone who's recognized something unexpected, and is trying to decide whether it's significant. "May I offer you some advice?" he asks, with the careful courtesy that comes from understanding that unsolicited guidance can be received poorly by proud young heroes. "Of course," you reply, because wisdom from experienced kings feels like a luxury you can't afford to refuse. "Grief doesn't end," Priam states with the authority of someone who's had extensive personal experience with loss. "It changes. It becomes manageable. It transforms into something you can carry rather than something that carries you. But it doesn't disappear." That's not particularly encouraging, you observe, with the kind of response that honest disappointment produces. "It's not meant to be encouraging," Priam clarifies with gentle humour that makes difficult truths feel like gifts rather than burdens. "It's meant to be useful, because if you understand that grief is permanent, you can plan accordingly." "Plan for what?" "For the person you're going to become," he explains with the practical focus that comes from understanding that identity is something you actively construct rather than something that happens to you. "For the life you're going to live with this loss as part of it. For the meaning you're going to create that makes carrying grief feel worthwhile." It's a perspective that hadn't occurred to you, the idea that loss could become raw material for construction rather than just evidence of destruction. That Patroclus's death might serve as the foundation for something positive rather than just the justification for unlimited retaliation against everyone responsible. "What did you build?" you ask with genuine curiosity about how practical wisdom develops from personal tragedy. "A different kind of love for my remaining children," Priam replies with the immediate honesty of someone who's thought deeply about this question. "A deeper appreciation for time that isn't guaranteed. A commitment to ensuring that their lives have meaning beyond the circumstances that brought them into existence." "And that helps?" "It helps," he confirms with the quiet satisfaction of someone who's found ways to transform suffering into purpose. "Not completely, not always, but enough to make continuing feel worthwhile rather than just inevitable." The exchange of Hector's body for Priam's ransom unfolds with the kind of ceremonial dignity that Bronze Age diplomacy prescribes for transactions involving royal corpses and international relations. Gold changes hands, formal courtesies are observed, and everyone involved maintains the fiction that commerce, rather than compassion, motivates these proceedings. But beneath the diplomatic theatre lies something more personal. Two men who've lost people they couldn't afford to lose, finding temporary common ground in the universal experience of grief that transcends political allegiance and personal enmity. "Thank you," Priam says, as his escort prepares to depart with their precious cargo, and his words carry weight beyond simple acknowledgement of completed transactions. "Thank you," you reply with equal sincerity, because his conversation has provided the first useful guidance you've received about how to exist in a world that no longer includes Patroclus. After the Trojans depart, you sit alone in your tent and consider what Priam's advice might mean for someone whose entire identity has been built around supernatural combat abilities and legendary reputation. What kind of person do you become when the person whose opinion mattered most is permanently unavailable to provide feedback about your character development? The question follows you through the days that succeed Hector's return, as life in the Greek camp settles back into routines that pretend everything has returned to normal, despite fundamental changes in its emotional infrastructure. Soldiers train, commanders plan, and the siege continues according to strategic objectives that feel increasingly abstract when measured against personal loss. You participate in military operations because obligations must be fulfilled and armies require leadership, but your heart isn't really in the conquest of Troy anymore. Hector is dead, vengeance has been achieved, and the motivations that brought you back to active duty have been satisfied through successful completion of your revenge agenda. What remains is the work of being alive, Priam's phrase that's proven surprisingly difficult to forget, the daily effort of continuing to exist when existence has lost most of its meaning, the challenge of finding purposes that make grief feel like something you can carry rather than something that's carrying you. The answer, when it comes, emerges from the simplest possible source: Patroclus's ashes, resting in their golden urn beside your sleeping space. During his life, your friend had possessed an uncanny ability to help other people become better versions of themselves. His friendship had provided the kind of honest guidance that made improvement feel possible rather than just necessary. His death has eliminated that guidance. but it doesn't have to eliminate the principles that made his guidance valuable. Perhaps the person you become in the aftermath of loss could be someone who provides for others what Patroclus had provided for you. Not through supernatural combat abilities or legendary reputation, but through the kind of honest concern for other people's welfare that makes leadership feel like service rather than domination. It's a modest goal, perhaps, but modesty feels appropriate when you're trying to construct meaning from the ruins of everything you'd thought mattered most. The work begins immediately, in small ways that feel like experiments in being the kind of person Patroclus would have wanted you to become. You start paying attention to your soldiers' concerns rather than just their combat effectiveness. You begin treating strategic discussions as opportunities to consider other people's perspectives, rather than platforms for demonstrating your tactical superiority. It's surprisingly difficult, this business of treating other people as complete individuals rather than supporting characters in your personal mythology. But difficulty feels appropriate when you're trying to honor someone whose friendship had been based partly on his willingness to challenge your worst tendencies. You're different, Briseis observes one evening as you sit together beside the campfire, watching flames dance in patterns that remind you of Patroclus's funeral pyre. How so? You ask, with genuine curiosity about whether your efforts at character development are visible to outside observers. In the movies. Less solitary, she explains with the careful precision that comes from trying to describe psychological changes that might be imaginary rather than real. Like you've remembered that other people exist. I never forgot that other people exist, you protest, though even as you say it, you're aware that forgetting and ignoring aren't necessarily different in their practical effects. Didn't you? She asks, with the gentle challenge that makes defensive responses feel like opportunities for honest self-examination. When was the last time you asked someone about their concerns, rather than telling them about yours? It's an uncomfortable question, because you can't immediately think of a satisfactory answer. Your conversations over the past months have been largely one-sided affairs, focused on your own grievances, your own objectives, your own emotional needs. Other people have been valuable primarily for their ability to help you achieve your goals, rather than as individuals with their own complicated inner lives. Point taken, you admit, because honesty feels like the minimum tribute you can offer to someone whose own honesty had been one of his defining characteristics. Patroclus would be pleased, Briseis observes, with the kind of gentle satisfaction that comes from witnessing positive character development in people you care about. Would he, you ask? Because external validation feels important when you're trying to change fundamental aspects of your personality in honor of someone who can't provide direct feedback about your progress. He always said you had the potential to be as good at caring about people as you were at killing them, she explains with the authority of someone who'd overheard countless private conversations between friends. He just wasn't sure you'd ever choose to develop that potential. And now you're choosing, she replies with simple acknowledgement of observable facts. Whether because of grief or guilt or genuine growth doesn't matter as much as the choice itself. The weeks that follow bring opportunities to test whether your efforts at becoming a better person translate into practical improvements in leadership and friendship. Military crises arise that require solutions beyond simple violence. Interpersonal conflicts develop that need resolution through diplomacy rather than intimidation. Soldiers face personal problems that benefit from attention and guidance rather than orders and dismissal. In each case, you try to respond with the kind of thoughtful concern that Patroclus would have demonstrated, the sort of engaged attention that treats other people's welfare as genuinely important rather than peripherally relevant to your own objectives. It's exhausting work, this business of caring about everyone around you as complete individuals rather than just useful resources. But exhaustion feels appropriate when you're trying to honor someone whose friendship had required considerable emotional labor and had provided even more in return. Some efforts succeed, others fail, and most fall somewhere in between success and failure in the complicated ways that characterize human relationships under stressful circumstances. But success or failure feels less important than the attempt itself. The daily choice to engage with the world as if other people's experiences matter as much as your own. I'd be proud of you, Ajax observes one evening, after you've spent considerable time helping resolve a dispute between soldiers whose personal animosity was affecting unit cohesion. Would he, you ask, Because external confirmation of progress feels valuable when internal assessment is complicated by grief and uncertainty. He always said you had more capacity for good than you realized, Ajax explains with the authority of someone who'd witnessed countless conversations between friends who understood each other better than anyone else understood either of them. He just wasn't sure you'd ever have the motivation to explore that capacity. Motivation, you repeat, testing the word like it might contain insights about your own psychological development. Loss has a way of clarifying priorities, Ajax observes with the philosophical wisdom that warriors sometimes develop when they've had enough experience with tragedy to recognize its patterns. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the foundations for the best things we do afterward. It's an idea that Priam had touched on during his visit, the notion that suffering can become raw material for construction rather than just evidence of destruction, that Patroclus's death might serve purposes beyond justifying vengeance, might create opportunities for growth that wouldn't have existed without the challenge of learning to live with permanent loss. The thought provides comfort on the days when grief feels overwhelming and purpose feels elusive. Not complete comfort. Nothing can fill the space that Patroclus's absence has created, but enough to make continuing feel worthwhile rather than just inevitable. Months pass, seasons change, and gradually you begin to understand what Priam meant about grief becoming something you can carry rather than something that carries you. The pain doesn't disappear, but it transforms into something more manageable, a permanent reminder of what you've lost and what you've learned from losing it. The urn containing Patroclus's ashes remains beside your sleeping space, a daily reminder of friendship's value and fragility. Someday, according to his final wishes, those ashes will be mixed with yours, after your own death provides reunion, in whatever form reunion takes among the heroic dead. But until that reunion occurs, you have the work of being alive, the daily effort of becoming someone who honors his memory, through choices that reflect the values he'd tried to teach you when teaching was still possible. It's not the life you'd planned, not the story you'd expected to live, not the legacy you'd imagined creating when divine enhancement and legendary reputation seemed like the most important measures of success. But it's a life that feels worthwhile, a story that includes meaning beyond personal achievement, a legacy that includes positive effects on other people's experiences, rather than just impressive statistics about enemies killed and cities conquered. Thank you for joining us for part 4 of Achilles' journey, where grief transforms into wrath with the efficiency of a Bronze Age weapons factory, and the world's most dangerous man discovers that the hardest battles are fought with daily choices rather than divine weapons. Sweet dreams.